Welcome to Eye on the Illini. This is Mike Cagley here, and we are going to have kind of a treat today. We're having the CEO of Fanstake, Greg Glass, is coming on, and he is going to talk to Illinois fans and Big Ten fans about the NIL changes and what it means and what it's like to compete on a national basis. Greg, thanks for coming on.
Mike, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, before we get started, I think what you guys do at Fanstake, it really kind of it's obviously an innovative company doing things a new way, but it also probably provides some credibility for you when we talk about how does this guy know about NIL and why does Mike think he's an expert? So if you want to go over a little bit about Fanstake and what it is and what you do to help the market come into college sports, I'd love to hear that.
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect place to start. So, yeah, Fanstake is essentially a competitive recruiting platform for college athletics. And the way we think about it is the design and intention from the very beginning was how can we potentially democratize the process for all these different schools out there? And the genesis for this, the original idea was, well, if you can actually get your fans to support the teams directly in a really low risk way, you could change the game. And so what we mean by that is you can go on Fanstake and let's say you want to see your point guard return or your quarterback, whatever it might be. I can put $25 on them. And if they end up coming back to Illinois, it converts into an endorsement deal between Fanstake and that athlete, and it's funded primarily by the Illinois fan base. However, if they decide that they want to hit the portal and transfer somewhere else, and let's say they go play at Notre Dame, well, you as an Illinois fan get 100% of your money returned. And it's the Illinois fan base. I'm sorry, it's the Notre Dame fan base that ultimately funds that endorsement deal. So the idea behind it stemmed really from a law that passed last year in Tennessee that essentially gives these athletes the ability to negotiate these deals in advance. And so the way to think about Fanstake is essentially just it's a negotiation platform where an athlete can go in and understand what their opportunity is before making a decision. And for a lot of these guys, that's important. They need to understand, all right, how much NIL money can I potentially get if I play at one school versus another school? Now, that's not the only decision these kids are making. And I think that's one of the really interesting pieces of insight that we've learned over the past couple of years here is that look, like any profession, there are multiple variables involved in terms of how a kid decides where they're going to play. It's playing time, coaching, location, facilities, staff, etc., who you're playing with. But money obviously is a part of it now. And so we're trying to allow all schools to compete in a way where, look, even if you don't have these big donors who are writing $1 million checks, you probably have a pretty passionate fan base, almost every school does, who can write small checks. And together you can actually have an impact.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool because you look at Illinois in the top 10 of alumni out across the United States. Certainly, that would be something that would be a strength potentially for an Illini if you have a motivated fan base. And how does one of these movements get started then?
It started it really depends on the school. Really, we've got programs everywhere from Louisville to Montana State to Howard to Wisconsin that have a decent amount of stakes on the platform. Some of it is driven by athletes where they're actually telling their fans like, "Hey guys, this is a great place to support us." Because they end up getting 95% of any kind of contribution, where we just keep processing fees
Okay.
essentially. And so sometimes it's the athletes who are promoting it. Other times it's the fan bases coming together, where we saw University of Colorado, for example, a bunch of fans who were trying to get an athlete from the portal to come to Colorado, and they were sharing on social media. And so there's a certain virality to what we're doing that's kind of essential. And that's what we're hoping is that if you can get 100,000 fans who chip in small dollar amounts, suddenly you're competitive with these big whales who are coming in, writing in these checks that they're not going to stop. And even in this new environment, which we'll talk a little bit more about, the donation money is still going to be critically important. In fact, it's really just kind of a reset in terms of the expectations for financial support, where it's going to get actually, unfortunately, probably more and more expensive to be competitive.
Yeah, and that certainly seems to be the route of everything these days. The one thing I would say is if you are trying to back a player, trying to make your move as a fan base or as an individual fan, the beautiful thing about this is if the guy goes or the gal goes somewhere else, you get your money returned to you. So there's really not there's not a risk in terms of that. I guess the only risk is, if you put down that $100, make sure you can afford it if
That's
that
right.
player comes to your school.
That's right. And we always say, look, for me, I don't put down anything that I'm not willing to pay for. It's the other way to think about it is like I college basketball in particular is one of my favorite products on the planet. And I watch it religiously. I'm willing to pay, 50, $100, maybe $200 to have a better team.
Yep.
If I don't get the better team though, I want to like I'm not just going to send a check to some unknown spot where it's opaque and you don't have a great understanding for where that money's going. If I can have a little influence, I could also put money on the players who I think will make a difference, put money on players primarily who I want to return rather than potentially going to the NBA or hitting the transfer portal. That's how I think about it. And Fanstake is actually going to expand in more directions where even beyond money, we're going to allow you just to kind of engage in games and do other things that can support your team where there are going to be brands on the platform who are working with athletes and using their NIL. And as long as fans are engaged, you're helping your team. And so we're really trying to expand the opportunities for fans to participate and help their team win while their team's out there playing for them.
Yeah, that is so cool. So, folks, you can why don't you give them an idea of where they can find you if they want to do any research or that and
Absolutely.
learn about you.
Yeah, so just fanstake.com, Fanstake. Check it out. You can sign up right there and also just kind of explore the athletes and see what's happening on the platform if you just want to see what's going on there.
Perfect. So we talk about the changing environment. You obviously have the house settlement, and can you tell us, in layman's terms for fans, what the difference is between August 5th, 2025 and August 5th, 2024, if there is that much, and what your
Yeah.
perception of that is?
There is. And so look, first and foremost with the House settlement, and we'll talk about congressional action, executive orders, all of this, and what's in conflict. But the House settlement allows the schools to now share revenue directly with the athletes. There's a cap on the amount they can share. It's equivalent to about a little over $20 million every year. And that's across all sports, both genders, right? So one thing you need to understand, especially in a conference like the Big Ten, is that that is not enough money to actually be competitive. A school like Ohio State, for example, is spending 30 plus million on football alone. Forget all the other sports, forget basketball, and so on. And so, we're finding is that if you're a Power Four school, you are going to be north of this effective salary cap. And so it really is a soft cap that they're implementing. And the additional money is going to come from those traditional sources of donations. And can you get these third party independent NIL deals on top of it to remain competitive? Now, every school looks at this a little bit differently. If you're a big school like Illinois, you've got different priorities. I think Illinois, I actually think of historically as a big basketball program, and football, obviously, you want to be successful as well. Football is far more expensive across the board. Even the biggest basketball programs, and I actually happen to be a fan of Duke, don't hold that against me, but Duke basketball, who you would think is spending a lot of money, and they are, their football team still costs far more. And that's just the business dynamics of these sports. And so really it's a matter of like, how do you get, you're going to need in the power conferences north probably of 10 to 15 million in football and usually about 5 to 10 million in basketball. That's before you get into women's basketball. That's before you get into volleyball, baseball, everything else. And so that's really what it's going to look like. And the other part of this is that The NCAA, through the College Sports Commission, which is essentially just the Power Four's ruling body, is introducing this new clearinghouse, which is supposed to have oversight on what deal is fair to move forward with and what is not. And the rules around it are if you're associated with a particular university, you can, so these collectives who are associated, you can only do deals at fair market value. And so they supposedly are going to be ruling on what is fair and what is not. Now, the challenge with that is that fair market value is a very subjective term. And if you look at it in terms of the legal definition, it's what a willing buyer is willing to pay to a willing seller. And so you're going to see probably a lot more lawsuits, unfortunately, as this plays out. Fanstake's in this unique position where we're unassociated. So we're not tied to a particular university. We're doing this by definition in a free market where all these different fan bases can compete. And the market dynamics are front and center and transparent. So we have a benefit there versus the traditional collective model.
And so how high can people go? And then is the amount that they can go over the cap, I guess, for lack of a better word, is that going to be influenced by whether contracts are approved? Or can you just say, well, they didn't approve it, but we're going forward with this deal?
Every school, I think, has a different risk threshold for this. We know a lot of programs are pushing, and their belief is that, look, if we have the money and we can do the deals, we're going to do it, and we feel like we have the legal right to do it that way. And that's one of the challenges, I think, with the college environment at large, because there's just so many different programs and they're all very competitive. And so at the end of the day, fans could be frustrated with the fact that, well, it does cost more money, but they end up more frustrated when you're losing and you're not competitive. And so they're like, why can't we be successful with our fan base? In terms of how much over the cap you can get, it really will depend on what's approved and what's not approved. Theoretically, third party deals, if it's independent, like a lot of schools, look, if you have Oregon, for example, can they potentially get Nike deals for all of their athletes? And does that give them a competitive advantage when it is truly a third party, but there is some kind of association? And with Fanstake in particular, we're saying because we're independent, yes, donors can come on and there is no theoretical cap. The way we look at fair market value is we're not only having these athletes promote Fanstake, we're having them promote additional brands, and we're sub-licensing their rights to bring more deals to them over time. And so we do our own sort of fair market value assessment, and it's not unlimited, but the number can be pretty high because if you have someone with a high brand value, an example I've always used is someone like Cooper Flag. Well, frankly, yeah, his NIL is worth millions of dollars, and we believe
Right.
we can get those brand deals in there for them. The number is relatively high, and we're going to find out what it ends up looking like at scale in the coming 6 to 9 months here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you see this as a rich get richer, or do you see this as an opportunity for people who plan well and maybe have, and I hate to say this, but the billionaire class that's motivated, can those schools move up the rankings if they can can coordinate and be successful?
Yeah, that's part of what our mission always was, is like, how do you actually make this an even playing field, at least in terms of the ability to participate? Because we talked about this briefly before jumping on, but it's the G5 schools that are really struggling right now, where the concern for me too, because as a college sports fan, you want a little bit of parity. You want that dynamism throughout all of college sports. And that's what makes it so special. And, part of what Fanstake's trying to do is democratize it where you can get those fan bases who may be from a smaller school, but still have a lot of pride and they can contribute and remain competitive. But if they don't, it could be a situation where you start seeing, yes, the rich get richer and it end up looking like professionalized sports where frankly it might even be the SEC and the Big Ten breaking away from everyone else, which a lot of other programs are frustrated to hear. about that happening. And so this is where it remains to be seen. What we do know is that the money part of it is not going away, it's just expanding. And so, how can you be competitive? How can there be potential salary caps? The other thing to be aware of is that, look, salary caps are illegal unless there's collective bargaining. So,
Right.
everything the House settlement is doing, the challenge is that it's still actually against antitrust laws. You can't collude amongst yourselves, which the schools are doing, and set a salary cap on an audience of they're not even employees. And so it very much is an antitrust violation in the United States. The NCAA knows that, which is why they're going to Congress. And so the situation today is like, look, if you're going to set the cap, you have to give the athletes some rights. Otherwise, you're going to lose in court, and it's going to keep on spiraling out of control here.
Which is spiraling out of control is pretty much the NCAA's, that's their modus operandus. So as we look at this for a school like Illinois, because we have obviously we're the Illini guys, is a school like Illinois, are they going to have to be willing to at least maybe not break the rules, but at least be on the cutting edge of a new frontier of behaviors,
Yeah.
um, to
I,
to
I
make
don't
sure
think anyone is explicitly breaking the rules. I think
because there's
that
very few, right?
right. I think that's right. Right now, there are very few rules, and the new ones that are implemented are subject to interpretation. And that is really what's going to have to happen is that every program I think that's going to be successful is going to interpret it in a way where how do we maximize the potential right now based on the rules and the guardrails that have been established. And I think in terms of what Illinois is going to need to do, because you're in one of the biggest conferences, is you have to figure out how to get as much guaranteed third party NIL as you can, because that allows you to not just recruit the best players, but retain the best players. Because I do know for a fact that some of the top programs have big budgets. They can kind of promise that they're going to be able to pay athletes whatever they believe the fair market value to be. And if you don't have the money, you're going to have to be competitive in other ways. And it's not to say that Illinois can't, right? Like I think it comes down to facilities, again, coaching, tradition, all these things that are influential. But at the end of the day, like if it's a decision between two schools and one is paying you another 300,000 a year, that's life-changing money. It's family-changing money for a lot of these athletes, would be for me too. And I totally understand why the decisions are being made that, all right, I'm going to make that call because all else, being equal, this is just the right opportunity for me right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I look back, one of the first things I ask a frustrated fan when somebody leaves Illinois is, have you ever turned down a job that pays more money?
Yeah.
And have you ever turned down a job that pays substantially more money? Most of the time, the answer to both questions is no. Now, we all know money can't buy you happiness, but as David Lee Roth once said, it can buy you a boat and you can float right up next to it. So it's really hard to get after somebody for that. When we look at what is out there in terms of we've heard about the executive order that
Right.
President Trump signed. What did that do to change the marketplace, or what did that do that makes things different or better?
To be honest, nothing. The reality of the executive order is that the executive branch doesn't have the ability to make laws. And it's only Congress that can actually change laws. And at the end of the day, that's what needs to happen. There needs to be a federal law changed where if Trump wanted the executive order to be enforced, short of it is that you need to change antitrust laws in the United States that gives the NCAA an exclusion here. Now, obviously, I think the reality of this situation that is ironic is when Trump, the name of the order was Donald Trump Saves College Sports, which is very Donald Trump like. And the challenge with that is that it actually will solidify the Democratic bloc. And so it has become even more partisan. And in Congress, the Democrats or the Republicans are going to need about 7 Democratic votes to actually get this through the Senate. at the end of the day, there is a bill called the SCORE Act that's going through the House right now. If it makes it through the House, then it gets to the Senate. And the fact is, from what we've seen, very few senators on the left want to support Donald Trump and his Saving College Sports executive order. And so it likely is dead on the vine. And so that's what's really ironic about this whole thing. As Trump came out and said that, it really solidified the fact that it's very unlikely Congress is going to do anything here because of this executive order. And it's something that really can't be enforced. The only potential thing that I've heard, perhaps they could hold federal funding back to some of these universities, which they've done in other cases. But that also is subject to additional lawsuits, which you've seen happen with some of the K through 12 funding. You've seen happen with Harvard. And so it's not that this administration is afraid to do that. I think they might consider it, but it is not something that anyone in the industry candidly is taking too seriously, because a lot of it was also optics and timing with everything else that's going on in Washington today.
And so essentially because of this existence of this executive order and then the way that divides people up, that does that essentially kill any shot for a bipartisan antitrust?
That's exactly.
Um,
Yeah. And
okay.
so right now, people are even more divided. And the rumor is Charlie Baker was dreading this, right? This is the last thing that he wanted, because he knew that you need people on the other side of the aisle to come together on this to support it. And the second it becomes really partisan like this, it's just going to be party line. And there are not enough votes in the Senate for anything party line.
Yeah, so that's then we're back to like the old Kinks song. We're back where we started. Here we go around
Here
again.
we go around again.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So now so folks, if you're not depressed, that should take you there. But I guess as I look at this, the one question I had is we've been talking, around Illini guys tables that the bag men
Yeah.
of college sports may be making a return because of this soft cap and additional dollars that are out there. Might we see the return of the pass the donor bag and then put it in a Nike shoebox, and now all of a sudden we have these deals that allow guys to make some dollars on
It's
top
possible.
of their stuff? Is that are we gonna see the bagmen back instead of the
Yeah, it's
billionaires?
certainly possible. I think that from my perspective, one of the reasons we built Fanstake was to try to just get this all out in the open, to try to have a level of transparency about what fair market value is for these athletes, because at some point there's an equilibrium. At some point, you're overpaying for these athletes, right? And you're going to get a quarterback that you spent several $1 million on that doesn't perform. And that needs to happen in any open market where you start to understand what the real value is. And when everything's underground or everything's happening behind closed doors, it's all full of misinformation, and it's really hard to figure out what is real. And if you talk to the athletic directors or the collectives, so much is fiction. So much is agents kind of pushing numbers up, saying he said, she said, all of that. And if everything was actually out in the open and a little bit more transparent, I think there would be a market that is sustainable. And so we're hoping it doesn't go back to the bagman days. I think a lot depends on how the NCAA progresses and what they ultimately view as a tenable solution to this. Because if they can bring in collective bargaining, give the athletes some rights. They don't necessarily have to make them employees, which they're very much against. And frankly, I don't think the athletes are totally in support of being employees, but they do want the rights. They do want the right to be able to negotiate and collectively bargain, which a lot of independent groups do without employment. I think once that happens, then they can agree to something like the NBA Players Union agrees to, or NFL Players Union agrees to, in terms of what is an actual salary cap we can accept that we don't feel like we're taking a hit. And that's at the end of the day what we believe is going to happen to have some stability. But we find that NCAA, the CSC, coaches still are kind of going to that kicking and screaming where they want to retain as much control as possible. but we'll see how that all plays out.
Yeah, it certainly puts a whole different twist on things, and the ability to transfer immediately takes all the leverage out away from the coaches who used to have literally 100% of the leverage.
That's
And
right.
it's got to be a tough swing going from 100 to 0, and I'm sure it would have been more comfortable and more acceptable had it went from 100 to 50, where it's at least tenable. I don't know, from a business standpoint, the question I would ask you is obviously a CEO of a company. How many years do you donate to something if you can't point back to an ROI?
Yeah.
That's the one thing about the NIL that I've never understood, because if I'm running a business and I want to take money home and I want to invest in my business and I want to pay my people so that I retain the best employees, I can't afford to be spending $9 million on a quarterback that may or may not make a difference.
It's a really good question because we're seeing a lot of that donor fatigue from especially some of these big donors where they feel like they've been giving and giving and giving. You don't necessarily see results on the field. And now with revenue sharing here, a lot of them had taken a step back and they're like, oh, you can share your own revenue with them. And the schools are saying, actually, we don't have $20 million lying around. That's all been allocated. We need you more than ever. And they're asking that same question where, like, what are we getting in return? Now, college sports and college sports fandom is irrational. And I think that's the other thing to sort of be aware of relative to traditional businesses. The idea of a fan is you're fanatical. And
Yeah.
that is the thing. It's like you're doing things that goes against rational behavior. And so, as much as you're frustrated when you lose, when it comes around next season, you're like, I think we got a chance. If I could just get behind the team this one more time. And that's what ends up happening. We're all passionate about this and we find our teams and we're diehards. And so, yeah, people keep going back to the well. At some point, you would think it would dry up, but it hasn't. And it's actually just gotten, more and more excessive in terms of how much people are contributing. And that's what makes it hard for the smaller programs to compete. And so, that's where we came in. We were like, look, if you could do this on a contingent basis where, you play fractional GM, you pick the players you want to invest in, the players who you think would actually make the difference in terms of winning or losing. And also, so we see a lot of fans doing these like protest stakes. Like they'll put money on people who probably will never convert, but they say like, look, we want a center like this, or someone
Yeah.
where they want because the coaches do see all this, the players see all this. And when you have a smackdown in a particular sport and you know why as a fan, or you think you know why, you go and you can kind of do a protest vote that doesn't cost you anything. You put money on Fanstake and say, this is the kind of player we want to see at Illinois. And you end up getting your money back because it doesn't convert, but it helps tell the story about what you believe would make a successful team.
Yeah, and I love the transparency component because I look at most of these alleged deals on NIL very similar to what I look at heights and weights in the WWE.
Right.
For years you heard Hulk Hogan was 6'8" and 330 pounds. I got a buddy who's 6'4" and 275, and a picture of him standing next to Hulk Hogan. They're roughly the same size. So, Andre the Giant wasn't really 7'4". So when somebody tells me player A is going somewhere else for 2 million a year, I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm also not going to go into the I believe it category as well.
Yeah, look, some of it is real and it got excessive at the end of last year as people were running up to the house settlement and trying to spend as much as they could. But there is a lot of fiction there. There's no doubt, and it's driven by bidding and competition and a lot of rumors. We've seen and heard stories from collective leaders, from agents, where it's clear to me that so much of this is noise. And even examples like the athletes themselves. There's an example last year when Jeremy Roach had left Duke to go to Baylor. There's rumors that he was getting several $1 million a year. And he put on Twitter, he's like, no, I'm not. It's not even close to that. I don't know where, like, everyone's, he's reading the news about it and just laughing, saying, like, that would be amazing. It would be a no brainer if I was getting that. And so I don't know where it all comes from, but the reality is there's a lot of misinformation out there, and transparency would really benefit the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. And speaking of irrational behavior, folks, if you want to join IlliniGuys.com, $99 a year, you get access to the message boards. And that's really what to me makes this different than a lot of other places, because you can get conversations with us, and it's not passive where you're just reading and listening to us. You're actually interacting with Brad Sturdy, with Kedrick Prince, Larry Smith, Matt Stevens, and myself. And it's much more interactive, and that's what we want to go with. As we wrap this up, give us another round on Fanstake so that people are aware of the company, and who knows, maybe Fanstake will be a key part of Illinois landing a key player next year. Or even just as importantly, Brett Bielema was one of the first coaches who really understood the fact that Illinois had to be very sharp with their money, and he started retaining players as opposed to trying to chase around Alabama and Ohio State, who have deep pockets. And so maybe Fanstake is the key to Illinois retaining someone that they really want to retain.
Look, that's where most of the programs actually are focused. I think that some of the recruiting stories get more headlines, but the reality is it's retention. It's letting your players know we want you to stay here. We love you. We're supporting you. Even if the dollar amount isn't as much as they can get, the fan volume makes a difference. When they see hundreds of fans supporting them with small dollar amounts, the players, we're in constant contact with the players, and they're touched by it. They're like, this is amazing. What an amazing fan base that we have. And so, yeah, again, fanstake.com, Fanstake. Check it out. And pretty soon, we're going to be introducing even more ways to support your team, where it's not necessarily pulling your wallet out. It's just playing games. If you're playing fantasy, you're playing pick'ems, doing other things like that, just play on Fanstake, and it's going to be able to support your players with NIL deals if you're successful. And so that's what we're doing, and we love to see some of the Illinois fan base out there.
Perfect. Well, folks, that is this episode of Eye on the Illini. Big thanks to Greg Glass for taking some of his time to come and talk to us about this. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the NIL environment as it is currently today, and have some idea of how maybe Fanstake becomes a way that Illinois can get and attract, retain the talent that makes Illinois relevant. It's so nice to have good coaches and an athletic director who knows how to hire them. And Illinois is relevant again. This is the first time I can remember this since my high school days in the 80s. And it is very nice to be back to that. Of course, Eye on the Illini is here each and every week. So don't miss us. Go ahead and subscribe, whether it's on YouTube or on your podcast. And until next time, go Illini.